true. Today is Tuesday, August 27th, 2024. The moon is a waning crescent. 44% remains, and just 7 days until new moon. And I gotta tell you guys, it has been absolutely beautiful in Charlotte for the last week. So all of my crying and complaining aside from the last quote unquote real episode that we did, it's been wonderful. So after having the 2 months of nothing but clouds, it looks like Captain Cumulus finally made an appearance and slapped all those clouds away for us. So we've had pretty much a solid week at this point of clear, and I mean clear, skies every night. So I've been making an effort to get outside as often as possible. Got my scope out a few times. I have finally decided on a setup for a permanent pier in the yard / mini observatory, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And yeah, it's going great. So to catch you up, the last couple of weeks have been excuse me, very, very busy for me. So I apologize greatly for not having an episode out last week. It's not something I ever like to do. But you know how it is. Life catches up with you at times. And I was working till 11 o'clock at some points last week. So it just wasn't much free time to do fun things like astronomy podcast as much as I love doing them. I hope you guys have all been enjoying the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall season to astronomy. I have noticed, to my utter enjoyment, the last few mornings I've actually gotten up quite early. If you are to rise around 5 a.m. right now and walk outside, you will see that Orion is back in the eastern skies, which makes me just incredibly happy to see. Let's have a hand for Orion. There it is. Yep. All right. Sorry. I promised I wouldn't press those buttons anymore, and here I am pressing them. But yeah, it's super cool. I saw Orion this morning, and then a couple mornings ago. It was crazy because that's normally, quite the event here whenever Orion shows back up, and I always notice it right away. But he was so high up at 5 o'clock in the morning that I was kind of shocked that I hadn't noticed it yet. But that just goes to show you how cloudy it's been for the last few months here. And lo and behold, right above Orion, I was amazed to see Jupiter and Mars are hanging out right in the vicinity, just about 10 degrees to the northeast, I guess you could say, of Orion, just above and to the left. If you're looking at Orion from the northern hemisphere, obviously, when I'm referring to my local viewing, it's in North Carolina here down in Charlotte. But yeah, Orion is up, and that means winter is coming for sure. It means another Milky Way season is starting to come to an end. I do notice whenever I go outside at, I'd say, 9:30, 10 o'clock, when it finally starts actually getting dark out, I look up and the summer triangle's already directly overhead, so if you want to get your scope out and you're aiming for something in the summer triangle, chances are, if you're starting early, you're going to have a meridian flip on your hands very soon after starting. So in my yard, it's a little bit tricky because the western half of the yard has so many trees on that side. So I tend to try to catch stuff in the east as it comes up. And that's why you'll hear me talking about rising early a lot of the times in the season, because that's my best opportunity to get things from my house. But that's not to say I can't make a trip to somewhere like the observatory and get better skies. And in fact, I am in early discussions with a good friend of mine, the same friend that I went on the dark skies trip with back in June, to maybe take a trip up to the Blue Ridge Mountains for a couple of nights. So the goal is, if we have nice clear skies at new moon, to at least make one night up there. And I'm going to have to make it quick because September is going to be a crazy month for me. I got a work trip, and then I got some other stuff planned. My 10-year wedding anniversary is coming up in September. And then in October, we're going to be traveling as well. So if I'm going to make it happen, it needs to happen very, very soon, because it won't be too much longer before the summertime Milky Way is no longer in the sky. And if you haven't gotten a chance yet to see the Milky Way this summer, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you go somewhere and check it out. Just take a drive. You know, if you check out lightpollutionmap.info, you should be able to find a, you know, Bortle 3 or 4 sky within an hour's drive of most places in the United States. And if you're in Europe or Australia or wherever you may be listening from, I would hope you have a similar situation there, though I do recognize if you're in Tokyo, it could obviously take a lot longer to get somewhere like a Bortle 4 sky. So let's see what else is new. I think I finally decided on my observatory build. So I know I talked a long time about potentially building one down at the club observatory down in Kershaw. I also had mentioned the fact that, you know, there's all these new observatory rent a pier type places that are going up out west. And those are really, really cool. And I strongly consider doing that. But ultimately, I just can't bring myself to ship my equipment off to somewhere else, even though I know it would be in good hands, because it seems like all those guys are just doing this for the love of the hobby, which I completely respect. But I'm just one of those people that I gotta have my hands on my equipment to work with it. If I'm not the one who's, you know, lugging it out of the garage and polar aligning it and getting my flat panel out and all that stuff, I just don't feel like I'm truly succeeding. So it's probably a personal issue more than anything. And it is absolutely nothing against anyone who decides to do that. If I had enough gear, I would probably send one out there. But I've only got 2 rigs really, and then my 2 Canon cameras, obviously. So, I mean, I've got a lot of gear, but I don't necessarily have a telescope rig that I can spare at this time to do it. That might change in the future. I'm not like swearing to it or anything, depending on what the results are like with this current place that I'm checking out. I might change my mind and end up sending down my, 80 millimeter scope down there or something along those lines. You definitely want to send something nice if you were going to do that, because it would be a real shame to get really nice dark skies like that, only to, realize 2 months into imaging out there, like, man, my equipment is what's limiting me, because you got great seeing and really great dark skies. And then you find out that your equipment just isn't great because you don't have wonderful glass or whatever the case may be. And then you would have to, buy a new scope, ship it out there, I assume pay to get everything swapped out and those sorts of things. So if you are going to do it, just think long and hard about exactly what you are wanting to accomplish. I would definitely think about things like focal length for a very long time and decide, what way you want to go. Generally, what I've seen, the pricing on these is going to vary depending on what type of telescope you're using in terms of the size, how much of a diameter of a swing you need for the telescope is what most places appear to charge by. And all of them that I've seen have been, pretty reasonable, with a few places being above and beyond as far as pricing goes. As far as how all these places work out, your guess is as good as mine. I surely hope they succeed. I want these people to succeed because that ultimately means more people get access to dark skies, which is what the goal is for all of us. Right. So now, all of that being said, I came up with a plan that is going to be a pier in my side yard. And I say side yard because I have a gate in my side yard that I can shut and lock, so I don't really have to worry about anyone roaming by and messing with my stuff. I live in a really safe neighborhood. I've never had anything bad happen here, but I still wouldn't feel super comfortable leaving my rig, out in the open like that. If I were to build an entire shed, maybe I'd feel a lot more comfortable, but I'm not wanting to do that. I want to make something light and easy that I can throw one of those Telegizmo 365 covers over and not have to worry about building a whole, observatory building around, because the setup that I ultimately want to put out there is my Rokinon 135. And the reason for that is because I image in narrowband with that scope. So it's a color camera that I use on that. It's the ASI 294 MC Pro. And I have the L Pro F2 version, which is just an incredible dual narrowband filter. In fact, I think it might be the L Extreme. Here, let me check on that real quick. All right, so yeah, it is the L Extreme. I have the L Pro on my 80 millimeter doublet. They all have such similar names. I have a hard time remembering them, but the Rokinon 135 has the L Extreme on it, which is a really good dual narrowband f2 filter. The faster version is needed because it is an f2 lens, and that allows me to gather a whole lot of data very quick, even under highly light polluted skies. And the thought here is that I will be able to get a whole lot of data on specific targets, at any given time whenever I have a decent night, which is really what I want to go for, because there are a lot of decent nights here, I guess you could say, like in the, winter, maybe not so much this summer, but like generally speaking, we get a lot of decent nights in Charlotte. But the really, really great nights, like the excellent seeing on new moon type of nights, those are rare. So those are the nights when I tend to, pack up my big scope and head down to the observatory. Since that is the case, I figured I could do the majority of my home imaging with the Rokinon 135 on a permanent pier outside. And I say permanent, but it won't actually be permanent. I'm actually going to follow Luco Matico. He has a tutorial online, which I will link to, for the ultimate budget pier. And it's a really, really good job what he did. He used builder's cinder blocks for the base, and then he used some really tacky adhesive basically between the bricks, and he was able to kind of wedge them together in such a way that they essentially become one tall brick because they're just really solid that way. And then he has all of that on top of a concrete pad, and then he built his own mount base or pier extension, whatever you want to call it, for the telescope itself, using these 10 by 10 by 20 millimeter steel plates. He has two of those. He, used some thick screws, and forgive me, I don't know the exact sizes. I think they're like M12 to connect them together. And then he actually used the base of his tripod legs, or the base that your actual mount sits on his tripod rather. That is what he connected to the top. So he's got, a easily levelable base on a nice solid pier that you could yank on as hard as you want, and it's not going to go anywhere. And I figure if I could set something like that up in the backyard in the right location to where I can still at least get Orion. I'm never going to be able to get like the Eagle. Well, maybe the Eagle. I wouldn't be able to get the Lagoon and the kind of lower stuff in the southern skies from here. But the trade-off would be having to put it in the front yard. And if I had to put it in the front yard, again, I feel like I'd have to build a whole building around it and everything. And I figure this is a good test run. I build my first pier, see how difficult it is. If I end up, falling in love with the process and, it's not that difficult for me, then, maybe I'll build another pier in the front yard and build a shed around it. But the big plan, the long-term plan, and why I'm not building a large scale observatory here or down in Kershaw is I would like to get either a pull behind camper, fifth wheel, or maybe even a van, like an Amazon style van, one of the tall ones that you can stand up in. And I basically want to make a mobile observatory. And I think this is going to be fairly easy, all things considered. I've seen a few videos online for people who have made mobile observatories. I've seen ones that people pull behind their vehicles that are kind of like a purpose-built trailer that has legs that come down and a pier that'll sit down. And I may do something like that. I'm not entirely sure. I might build a trailer with, a pier and all that kind of stuff. But really, if I just had a van that I could pack all of my gear into and then drive out west, and, if I've got a bathroom in the van and a cooktop, then I've got kind of everything that I need to live for a few weeks. And then I could use like a Starlink satellite, and I could, work from home during the day and then image all night. And that would pretty much give me everything that I need to do. So I ultimately think that's what I'm going to go with. As far as whether it's going to be a van or a pull behind or a fifth wheel or what have you, I do have a truck. I already have a Nissan Titan, so I could pull, relatively, reasonable size loads with that truck, no problem. Certainly something like a pop-up camper would be no problem. So just got to decide what the right fit is for a travel trailer or a van. If I find the right deal on the right van, then maybe I'll, jump at it, but it'll probably be next year when I start this, just because we have a lot of personal things that we're working on right now and a few more things to pay off around the house. So, get those things out of the way first, and then I can start tackling the dream, which is going to be having a mobile observatory that I can drive out to Okie, or wherever I want, to the darkest of the dark skies in the United States, and stay for weeks at a time if I choose to do so. So that is the plan. Outside of that, though, things have been pretty good around here. Like I say, I've had a lot of clear skies. Last night, I did something really fun that I haven't done in a long time. I tried to do it the night before, but I had just kind of missed the window on it because it got a little bit too late. And if you are in the Northern Hemisphere, this is something that you can actually do yourself right now as well. So you may or may not know, depending on how much you pay attention to the planets and their movements, but Venus is actually an evening star again. Obviously it's a planet, but they refer to it as an evening star on all of the space sites that I see. So what you can do is, if you get out just after sundown and then look to your west, you will see Venus, and it's about 10 degrees above the horizon. Which seems super duper low, and it is, don't get me wrong, but it's not as low as, if you're looking at an app and deciding if you should go and check it out, it's not as low as you would think that it is the best way that I can put it. Because when I was looking at the Sky Safari Pro app, when I was kind of planning this out, I said to myself, man, oh man, that is super low. There is no way I'm going to be able to see that unless I can completely lose all of the trees. So I got online on Google Maps and started looking for somewhere with a really low horizon, within a reasonable 10, 15 minute drive from my house, and actually did find a place. I found a church, and across the street, there was some trees, but they were way at the end of a field. So they were pretty far off visually. So I went ahead and I headed out there. And kind of a funny story, I got out of my truck and I heard this really loud noise behind me, and I was like, oh my God, what was that? It kind of sounded like a cow almost, but not quite, like angrier than a cow is the best way I can put it. And I was kind of sitting there staring. I'm holding my camera bag that's got my R5 and my R7, and I've got my 3-legged thing tripod. I got all my gear on me. I'm like, don't want to get robbed, and don't know what that is, but I'm not comfortable right now. And I was staring through the woods, and I realized that it was a deer, like a buck, that was staring at me. And I'm assuming he was letting out a warning noise to the rest of the group, because there were several other deer. I didn't realize how many there were, though. So what happened was, I was just kind of like, okay, they're deer, not that big of a deal. And I grabbed my gear, shut the truck doors, and walked out into the field. And I start setting up my tripod, and then I heard the noise again, and I turn around and look, and God, I've never seen so many deer. They all were running by me. So they came out of the woods where I was parked with my truck, and they all ran behind me right in front of the church parking lot, I guess you could say, and then into the field beside it, and then back. And I just sat there with my jaw open for a minute, because you see deer all the time in North Carolina. It's not an uncommon sight, but I had never seen that many in one group together. It was like a whole herd of them. And so by the time I got my phone out, there were only 5 or 6 left within view. And I got a pretty good little video of them. I ended up putting it up on TikTok. I don't really watch TikTok, but I do occasionally upload videos to it. So if you ever want to check that out, I'm on there as a QC Roo Photography. Actually, I think it's under the Astrocast now. I'm pretty sure I did update the TikTok to the Astrocast theme, because I was trying to get people over. It's at AstroQC Roo. So if you ever want to check out those videos, I actually got a lot of cool stuff on TikTok related to my astronomy stuff. So if you would like to see, any of my photos or videos, or, any of that kind of stuff, at AstroQC Roo is where to find me on TikTok. And I guess while we're talking about it, I might as well tell you about my other socials. I, of course, have for Instagram, and that's where I put all my really good photos. Not to say that every photo I have on there is great, but like if I take a really good space photo, it'll generally end up on Instagram. So if you're ever curious what some of my work looks like, you can check that out at QC_ROO. That's ROO_photography. So again, that's at QC, like Queen City _ROO_photography. And I'll put all these socials in the link for the page note, show notes, and you guys can check those out and let me know what you think. If you are on Instagram and you want to tag me and show me some of your stuff, I would love to see that. You guys are also welcome to email me if you ever would like to. It's ruastrocast@gmail.com. I do occasionally get email from listeners, and I love getting it. I actually would love to start doing a monthly or even bi-monthly, depending on how many emails we get, Q&A type episode. So if anyone has any questions they would like answered, whether they're about astronomy, wildlife photography, or just me, myself, and I, you can feel free to email those to ruastrocast@gmail.com, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So yeah, that is all of the social media stuff. Finally, one more thing about the Astrocast. I might as well mention it while we're talking about connections and socials and questions and answers and all that kind of good stuff. I wanted to let you guys know that it looks like I have made the first partnership with an outside brand. Other than our buddies over at Dark Dragons Astronomy, obviously they were our first partnership with the brand, but the first sponsorship is going to be with High Point Scientific. And I am extremely happy to say that because I have been shopping with them ever since I got into astrophotography, and they are always the first place that I recommend people buy. We don't have our official agreement in place yet. I'm working on ironing out the details on that. But I'm very much looking forward to working with High Point. They're just an awesome store. They have great prices. They have excellent customer service. So I can highly recommend them. And I'm going to be really thankful to have them as a partner to the show. So look forward to me talking a little bit more about High Point in the future, but not too much. Don't worry. I promise I will not make this an ad-driven show. So there's just something I want to talk to you guys about this week, and it's kind of something that's near and dear to me because I'm not a lazy person, but I'm a lazy person, if you know what I mean. I have no problem getting up in the morning. I have no problem doing what needs to be done. I'm not a procrastinator, but when it comes to certain things, I sometimes just, I don't know if it's that I don't have the energy to do it or if I just don't have the mental capacity after thinking as hard as I do all day long at my job. But what I've been searching for a long time, ever since I got into astrophotography, is kind of the ultimate simple setup for astrophotography. And this probably won't surprise any of you that are longtime listeners to the show because you've heard me do, the basic astro rig, the camera and the tripod episode. We've done Let's Shoot the Milky Way, which was an awesome one. We are going to do Shoot the Moon, and I actually have a little bit to talk about that in a few minutes here. But first, I want to talk about just using the Star Adventure GTI on its own. And that is, when I say on its own, I mean using a tripod, the Star Adventure GTI, and then slapping a camera on top of it. And that's it. So the reason I'm saying this is because I really wanted to put my Canon R5 on the Star Adventure GTI along with the ASI Air and a guide scope, and then my 24-70 L lens, because I wanted to see how well that lens could really perform in astrophotography because it's a, really expensive, nice lens. And I was super curious about it. And I had a new toy in my camera bag. So of course I wanted to astro it up as much as I could, as any of us would. But when I went to go kind of put it all together, I realized in practice that it wasn't quite what I was expecting. So I ended up having to use a Vixen dovetail bar, like a 250 millimeter bar, 12 inch. I think it was 300 millimeter. I think it was a 12-inch bar. And I basically put it sideways. On the one side, I had the camera with the lens. And on the other side, I had the ASI Air and the guide scope, and then a little bit of extra weight because I needed to balance it out in declination. And it kind of worked, but it was a real pain in the butt to use because if the camera timed out, which is something, there were a lot of things that needed to be done. So the battery, if you needed to change it, you had to remove the L bracket, which I needed to connect to the Vixen dovetail. And then if the screen timed out, it would disconnect from the ASI Air and yada, yada, yada. And it was just, frankly, it was overcomplicated. And I stepped back and I was thinking about it. And I said, if I'm going to bring this to good skies, like, Bortle 4 or less, which is kind of what the plan is, and I'm going to be shooting at 50 millimeters or less, which is generally what I will do with a lens like that. Do I really even need auto guiding? Probably not if I do like a really good, polar alignment. So what I decided to do instead was I went and got one of those 90-degree L bracket pieces that you can put on your polar scope. And the reason I did that is because I've got bad knees and it's difficult for me to, squat all the way down and look through the polar scope. And getting on one knee, just forget about it. I'll be in pain. So I got one of those, and that makes it super easy to, look through the polar scope and get Polaris lined up properly. And then all you need to do if you don't want to use an ASI Air and all that other stuff is actually just screw the camera directly into that same Vixen dovetail, but you can do it straight front and back, like not on its side. So you can center it a lot easier. It's a lot easier to balance in declination because you got more room to move it back and forward since it's not on its side. And then you can even plug in a shutter cable from the camera directly to the Star Adventure GTI. And if you do that, and you can use a shutter cable, super easy to get, like any intervalometer that you may have comes with one, or you can just order one standalone for $5 on Amazon. It's one of those things that's perfectly fine to order on Amazon, by the way, a shutter cable. If you can do that with just the Star Adventure GTI app on your phone, you can pull it up. You can do the polar alignment routine through the app. And what I mean through the app is turn the light on the polar scope up so you can see the stars easier. And then you have the opportunity to do a 1, 2, or 3-star alignment. And that thing is good enough where even a 1-star alignment, as long as you've got your location entered correctly in the app, will do a pretty darn good job of getting you where you want to be. And the beauty of it is, even if you, let's say you do a 1-star alignment to Vega, and then when you're done and lined up on Vega and you verified on the back of the camera screen that you've got it perfectly centered, you say, okay, I want to go to, let me think of something far away from Vega. I want to go to Arcturus. Okay. And then your telescope slews all the way over there. Let's say that it doesn't perfectly center on Arcturus. You can just use the SynScan app, the one that's built in for the GTI, to center Arcturus and then hit sync. And then it'll add that as a sync point to your app. And then you can continue to add, more sync points as you go. And throughout the night, basically what I'm getting at is it'll be just as good as the ASI Air at locating objects, as long as you're, centering them perfectly after you say go to and then hitting sync. After you have something like a 50 millimeter lens on a DSLR or mirrorless camera, properly polar aligned, connected with a shutter cable, then it's really just as simple as using the app to take the photos. So you set your camera to whatever settings you want. So for example, I want to do bulb exposure on the camera, because I can set the GTI to say how long to take the photo through the app, the SynScan app, ISO 3200, and then, f 3.2, stop it down just a little bit to sharpen up those stars. That's very crucial if you're using a camera lens. For those of you who don't know what I just said, your f-stop on your camera is basically the aperture that determines how much light comes in through your camera lens. And the lower the number, the lower the f-stop, if you will, that's what we say, the more light is going to come in. But when you're doing astrophotography, depending on the lens that you're using, and I would say 9 times out of 10, if you have something like an f2 or even f1.8 lens, you generally are going to want to do what's called stopping it down. And that means lowering down that f-stop number down to like 2.4, 2.8, 3.2, or, whatever you need to do, 1 or 2 stops. And that will generally make your stars more pinpoint sharp. So I always do that anytime I'm using a camera lens. I always stop the lens down a little bit, and it tends to sharpen up the stars. You trade off a little bit of the light that's coming in. So, maybe if you were shooting at 1.8 instead of 2.4, you would have to shoot 2 minutes instead of 1 minute to get the same amount of light. But your photos are going to look infinitely better, more focused, sharper, et cetera, et cetera. And the beauty of all of this together with the Star Adventure GTI and the simplicity of it is that you can get, very, very good photos. I'm talking like up to 2-minute long exposures if you do a good polar alignment, which is not difficult to do on that polar scope. It's not difficult at all. In fact, once you kind of figure out how it works, and, I don't know nowadays how many people do manual polar alignments by looking through a scope and actually, lining up Polaris on the polar clock. I would imagine not a lot of people do. In fact, I bet you some of you who are listening have never done a polar alignment like that, because if you have an ASI Air or a C-Star, you don't really have to do that. The ASI Air just takes a photo and then says, okay, move the scope this way, this much, and then move it up or down this way, this much. And anyway, I say all that to tell you that the polar alignment can actually be faster than what you do with the ASI Air. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's really not. If you can line Polaris up directly above your camera lens. So what I do is I actually physically move my camera and my mount, pick them up and move them until I can see that Polaris is centered directly above them. And then, you can adjust the alt-az for the latitude to make sure that you're correct, 32 degrees in my case or whatever. Usually you will get Polaris right within the field of view of the polar scope when you look through it. And then it's just a matter of, twisting the knobs to get it exactly where it needs to be. And usually that only takes me like 30 seconds to do if I line it up correctly. And I mean for like a really good polar alignment, something that on the ASI Air would probably be, under 30 arc seconds. So yeah, it's really simple to do. And it's really fun. That's what I'm finding. Like, don't get me wrong. I love my, big rigs with computers and auto guiding and all of that. But there's something really satisfying to me about taking just a camera and a tracker and coming back with an incredible photo. And some of my favorite like YouTube astrophotographers have done just that when they go on these, elaborate trips to other countries, like, maybe to the Atacama Desert in Chile to take, beautiful Milky Way photos or what have you. They don't pack down entire giant rigs to bring with them. They will bring, a DSLR or a mirrorless camera with a Red Cat and a Star Adventure GTI. And then they'll make a counterweight out of a bag of sand when they get down there. You know what I mean? So try to simplify a little bit if you can. I'm not saying like you need to break your rig down if you've only got one rig and, get rid of your auto guiding or anything like that. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying, though, is if you are lucky enough to be in a position like me where you own multiple cameras, try setting one of them up for as simple of a setup process as you can, and try to simplify that as much as possible. Try to remove touch points, like use that shutter cable from the camera to the mount. To me, when I first saw that, I was like, why the heck would you use that? Why wouldn't you just use the camera, the app that comes with the camera? Because if you use the shutter cable and the mount, and then open up the app, then you can just program everything in one app, and you won't have to, worry about physically touching your camera and using countdowns and all that stuff, because it acts just like an intervalometer. So you're not physically touching the camera. Therefore, you're not shaking it. Therefore, you get rounder stars. So give it a try if it's something that sounds interesting to you. I started doing it with just the tripod and the camera, but unless you are in like the darkest of dark skies, you're going to find that to get a little bit disappointing. You can get beautiful shots of all the stars. Don't get me wrong, especially with like a really wide field of view. That can be really fun to do. But once you get to the point where you're like, okay, I want to get some nebulosity involved in these photos, that's when you will probably want to add in a mount and start taking, 30-second, 60-second, or even in my case, 2-minute exposures with just your mount and no auto guiding and a camera. Now, the next stop for me is going to be, I want to get a clip-in filter for my R5. They actually sell one. Optolong does. They sell the L Pro actually, which is one of my absolute favorite light pollution filters that I own. I have a 1.25 inch one that I use with my big 80 millimeter scope. I say big, it's just an 80 millimeter, but it's a lot bigger than my Rokinon, so it's my big scope. And that filter has been phenomenal. But it's one thing to keep in mind if you are going to use just a camera. The couple of caveats there are, if you're in a really light polluted area and your camera is not astro modified, you will have a difficult time picking up, nebulosity on 2-minute exposures. In my experience, you got to have some kind of light pollution filter if you're going to appreciate those types of views. But I'm going to get that filter probably in the next couple of weeks and then give it a try. It's a couple $100. So I didn't have the money this week to get it. But I'll get it very, very near future and give it a try and let you guys know what I think. And hopefully it'll come out really good. I saw some of the reviews on the Clip-In L Pro. It's really cool. It goes behind the lens. I have a, what is it? An Astronomics CLS, I believe it's called. It's Astronomics Clip-In light pollution filter. I have that for the old Rebel T3i that I have that's astro modified. But my R5, I have not astro modified it yet. I'm starting to consider doing that. But if I do it, I'm going to send it somewhere professional and have it done, because that camera is way too expensive to be playing around with. And I will have to find out if they can give me a UV-IR cut filter that I can reinsert into the camera, because I still have to be able to use this camera for regular photography. I'm actually shooting an event in a couple of weekends and I have to use my R5 with it and a flash and everything. So if I can get it astro modified and still have a filter that I can pop in there to use for regular photography, then I'm probably going to end up doing that, but that remains to be seen. But anyway, give it a try, guys. Let me know if you enjoy it. I have really enjoyed it. I think it's super fun getting out there, just to mount the camera and seeing what I can come up with. It's kind of get me back to my roots a little bit is what it feels like. And sometimes it's fun to not have to take it all so seriously. I guess you could say, like, sometimes I just want to see if I can get a beautiful picture of the stars. And sometimes that's enough for me. I don't always have to get the 500 millimeter focal length nebula for 3 hours, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes I'm just like, let me get a really pretty picture of Orion and let me see if I can do that. And if I can, I'm super happy. For example, the other night, I'm sure many of you noticed when the moon and Saturn were extremely close last week. And I mean extremely close. I was able to get them both within one field of view of my 80 millimeter scope. So I had the SV Bony 80 millimeter and the ASI 585 MC Pro. And I had Saturn and the moon in one frame. And it had to be overexposed to get both of them, because if I underexposed enough to where the moon was visible and Saturn disappeared, unfortunately. So I overexposed a little bit, but that came out cool. I loved that because it just looked like the moon looked like the giant and Saturn looked like the little baby. But in reality that, Saturn would make our moon look tiny if it were actually right beside it. So that was really cool. I enjoyed taking that photo. And then again, this morning, I was out just photographing Orion, and getting some photos of Mars and Jupiter, right above Betelgeuse as well, which was a lot of fun. So definitely give that a try. If you end up enjoying it, shoot me an email. Let me know that you liked it. It's ruastrocast@gmail.com. All right. So we were talking about shooting the moon. I wanted to bring this up because I saw so many really, really cool photos of the August supermoon. So I suppose it was my wife told me it was a supermoon. Nobody else did, but I believe my wife. So she must have seen it somewhere. Anytime I hear supermoon, I always kind of raise an eyebrow, but apparently they are like 2 or 3% larger because it's closer to the Earth or something along those lines. And you guys can correct me if I'm completely wrong on those numbers, but it does apparently appear a little bit larger. As far as whether or not the average person can tell if it actually looks larger, I think that could definitely be debatable. But nonetheless, it was really pretty. I was outside. It was the first clear night, actually, was whenever it was full moon. So I was like, well, screw this. I don't care if the moon's out or not. I'm going outside with my camera and taking a photo of something. So I went outside with my Canon R5, and I put the 800 millimeter, the big boy lens on it, which was really, really cool. And that lens is so large. If you have it on the R7, which is an APS-C camera, and for those of you who don't know, APS-C is a slightly smaller sensor than a full frame camera. And full frame is closer to 35 millimeter, which is kind of like the original film standard. So when we started making digital cameras, the 35 millimeter standard was still the go-to. And that is how they came up with that sizing for full frame cameras. But APS-C cameras have a benefit of, even though the sensor is a little bit smaller, they effectively give you more focal length. And I'm saying effectively because, yes, I know it's technically a cropped view of the same photo if you were to take the same shot in a full frame camera, but to the eye, it appears closer. So anyway, if you put the R7 and the 800 together, the full moon's so big, you can barely fit it in the frame, because it's like 1200 something millimeters at that point. But with the R5 and that 800 millimeter lens, you are able to fill up, I don't know, maybe a third of the view, I would say. You've got plenty of room to move around the moon up and down in the frame. And what I did was I actually did lucky imaging on the moon, which is a method that you use in planetary imaging. And full disclosure, I am not a planetary astronomer. I would love to get into it one day, and I plan on getting a Schmidt-Cassegrain specifically for that reason. But I have not done much planetary astrophotography in my time yet. But anyway, so the idea is that you point your camera at the moon or, Saturn or Jupiter if you have a really long focal length. But in our case, we're just going to use the moon because for this, you can use any long focal length camera lens that you have. Hopefully you have something that's at least 400 millimeters or longer. But, if you've got a 300 millimeter lens, you can absolutely use that too. It'll look good. So point that at the moon. And then what you want to do is set your video settings to whatever resolution you prefer, really. Some cameras, it really varies from camera to camera. Like if you do a 4K crop on the R7, for example, the moon gets so big that it won't even fit all the way in the frame. But I use the R5 specifically because it can do 8K video, which is really, really cool. And I think it can only record like 20 something minutes at a time of 8K video because it takes so much juice and it gets the camera hot and it takes up a lot of space, as you might imagine, because they're very, very large files. And anyway, what I did was I got the exposure correct in video mode on the camera. And with the moon being as bright as it was, that took a little bit of tweaking. I had to use the underexpose button a little bit, but set the lens to manual focus and then adjusted that until the moon was nice and sharp. So that's not just adjusting your lens to infinity. And what that means is basically adjusting the lens to say, I'm going to focus on the farthest away object possible. And the way you do that is you look at your lens, physically look at it, and usually there is a tube that you can rotate, which is the focus tube or focus knob or focus ring, whatever you want to call it, a thing that you rotate on the lens itself. And there will usually be numbers. And then after all the numbers, there will be an infinity symbol. And generally speaking, you would line your focus up on that infinity symbol. But from there, I have noticed with the moon, you sometimes have to tweak it a little bit beyond that to get it really sharp. And this is kind of a tricky part, but it's very important to take your time on this part because you want to make the focus really good. You can get the focus pretty good and then, take these videos and make a photo out of it and it'll look pretty good. But if you really take your time and dial in that focus and get it just right, it's the difference between a super sharp, beautiful image of the moon and a decent one. So once you've got your exposure right and you've really dialed in the focus on the moon, then you can go ahead and hit record. And so in my case, I was recording at 8K, 800 millimeters on a full frame camera. So this was getting a whole lot of data. And I basically recorded for, I want to say it was about a minute. And I then downloaded all of the software that I needed to properly process these images. And basically what this involves is you take the video and you might need to convert it because I believe the application that I was using was looking for an AVI and Canon's file types didn't come out as AVI. They were like MP4s and they were in a different encoder and yada, yada, yada. But in any case, the idea is you bring the video over and then the software takes the video and splits it all up into individual frames. So if you've ever heard people talking about video and they say like 60 frames per second, like if you hear people talking about video games, for example, and they're like, my monitor can do 120 frames per second. Well, most video is either going to be 24, 30, or 60 frames per second. And in my case, I was doing 8K 30 frames per second, or actually 24 frames per second. Yeah, because it's film standard. And so I took that minute of video that I got. I chopped off the first couple seconds because that was me pressing the button and it was a little bit shaky. And then I also chopped off the last couple of seconds because, again, I was pressing the button to stop video and that can be a little shaky. And then I converted all of the remaining video into individual images. So you figure 1 second is 24 images. And then you have a video that is a minute long. I think I ended up with somewhere like 1,200 frames. It might have been 2 minutes, but it was about 1,200 frames. And I ran it through the software and basically said, I want you to use the 400 best frames out of these 1,200 frames and then stack them on top of each other. And if you've ever wondered how a so-called mineral moon is done, where you see a really beautiful, sharp image of the moon and it appears to be almost colorful on the surface, this is exactly how it's done. So Lucky Imaging can reveal the iron content in the moon, essentially. So if you get enough frames stacked on top of each other, and you do have to turn the saturation a little bit up on the image, generally, in my experience. If you guys never had to do that and got perfect mineral moons, I'd love to see how. But it's not going to reveal anything that's not already there. So you don't want to like overexpose the saturation and really soak it or anything like that. It'd look terrible and fake. But you can get a really, really impressive moonshot if you do this. I will actually share my photo of the moon this week with you guys, the full moon that I took, because it did come out pretty darn good and I'm pretty happy with it, all things considered. And give me just a second here and I'll tell you what that software is called. All right. So the software that I used is called PIP. That's PIPP. And that's the one that actually allows you to basically convert the video into frames. And then Auto Stackert. And that is auto, like AUTO, and then STACKERT. Auto Stackert is the one that you can load the frames into after you've converted them and actually stack the files up. Now, after they're all done and stacked and you've got a beautiful image that comes out, at that point, you can put it into Lightroom or Photoshop or what have you, and then adjust the contrast and details and sharpness and all that good stuff to your heart's content until you get the moon perfectly beautiful, just the way you want it. And what was really cool about this, I noticed when I did it with 8K, after I got done cropping the image, I ended up with something like 4,000 by 4,000 pixels, which is kind of crazy. I was able to zoom really far in on the moon and still keep a lot of detail. So I was really, really impressed with how, awesome that image came out in terms not only of quality, but just like pixel peeping, being able to really zoom in, and just shocked that you can do that with a camera lens. The other thing that shocked me, because I was curious about it after doing that, was I wanted to give that a try, the exact same thing, but with my 80 millimeter telescope. And you remember a few moments ago how I told you that the APS-C sensor is a crop factor. It essentially gives you a closer view of whatever you're looking at. Well, full frame would be, let's consider that to be like 1.0 on the view scale. The Canon camera is a 1.6 crop factor. So you're basically getting in, 0.6, closer, or well, that's not a good way to describe it. I guess the easiest way I can describe it is just to say that the field of view is narrower on a crop factor sensor than you would see on the wider field of view of a full frame. And then if you figure in a 1.6 crop factor, then you can kind of know what I mean as far as how much further cropped in it is. So all that to say, the camera that I had hooked up on the 80 millimeter doublet telescope that I wanted to check out the moon with was actually the ASI 585 MC Pro, which is an excellent new budget camera that they are selling. It's a cooled camera, first of all. So if you are doing deep sky photography, you get the benefits of being able to take long exposures without having a lot of noise introduced to the image. And it also actually, from what I've read, works pretty decently as a planetary camera. And this is why I wanted to give it a try when looking at the moon, because I figured, heck, why not? Let's see how many, frames per second we can get. And then we can always stack them up within the ASI Air itself, because it does have the ability to do that. So what was so crazy about this, though, is the sensor of the 585 is what's called a 1 by 1.2 inch sensor. That's what I call it anyway. It's literally 1/1.2 inch sensor, however you say that. But it has a diagonal size of about 13 millimeters, whereas a full frame camera has about a 43 millimeter diagonal size. And what that works out to, if you take the crop factor, and the way you could do that is dividing the diagonal of the sensor by the diagonal of a full frame camera. So in this case, we would divide 43 by 13 and we would get 3.25. So remember how earlier I said that R7 has a 1.6 crop factor? Well, the crop factor on the 585 is 3.25. So it gets you a much more zoomed in view than you would get with something like a full frame camera, for example. So what's cool about this is I'm able to get a really zoomed in view with this on a relatively small telescope. So it's been really awesome, because I feel like I'm able to get more reach than I would with something like my 294 MC Pro, or even like an amazing camera like the 2600 MC Pro, which is a full frame sensor. But I'm able to zoom in more effectively. So smaller nebula are appearing larger in the frame, and the quality is actually really good on this camera. It's kind of shocking how good it's been. So I did that while looking at the moon with the 585 MC Pro, and I was just blown away. So the way it works in the ASI Air, if you haven't used video mode, is it'll essentially give you the highest resolution that your camera can do. So for the 585, that in the ASI Air anyway, it's a 1080p view. And what you can do then is you can shrink it down to like 960p, 720p, 480p, and you can take it all the way down to 240p. And every time you lower that resolution, it's essentially bringing the view in closer. And what I found when I was looking at the full moon through the 80 millimeter with that camera is when I got down to 240p, it was so zoomed in, it was ridiculous. Like you could see individual craters, the whole frame was taken up by the moon. Like you couldn't even see, any sky around it. So if you have a, reasonably sized telescope, like an 80 millimeter, and you've been wondering about getting a second cooled camera, I'm going to highly recommend that you check out that 585 because it really kind of blew me away. I was like, holy crap, I was not expecting to be able to get this close of a view on these things. So the next thing I want to check out with it, obviously, is Jupiter, because I mean, if it can get that zoomed in on the moon, I'm wondering if I could, at least maybe see the stripes of Jupiter. I know I'm not going to get like an incredible view that I would with an Edge HD 9 or 12 or what have you. But for what it is, for the price, pretty awesome view, I gotta say. So I have definitely enjoyed using it. I hope some of you guys out there are enjoying using them too, because that combination has really blown me away with its quality. So just something fun I thought I would mention and take you through. After you get done with, like I say, Pip, Auto Stacker, those are the programs. They're free to download if you just do a Google search for them. Pip again is PIPP, and then Auto Stacker. If you need to convert any of your video files, so for if any reason, whatever type of video frames you're putting in don't work, you can use an app like Handbrake. It's free and it will actually convert videos for you as well. And then, like I say, use Auto Stacker to stack up all those frames once you've extracted them, and just pay attention to the various options and settings within Auto Stacker because there are quite a few. You can do mono or color, and then there's different types of alignments and all these types of things. So just pay attention to those. But at the end of the day, if you take your time and get good video footage of the moon, you can end up with an absolutely incredible photo. And, I know that as astrophotographers, we absolutely love our nebula photos and our galaxy photos. But if you're just looking to put something up that will really impress friends and family, not to sound too snide, but I mean, a moonshot is the easy way to go, because everybody loves the moon, particularly people who don't know a whole lot about astronomy necessarily. That's the first thing they're going to truly be able to appreciate if you can show them a really good view of it. Because, most pictures of the moon that people see are kind of lousy, like taken from a Galaxy phone or an iPhone, zoomed in, digital crop and all that kind of garbage. So if you can get a really good quality picture of the moon, people will definitely appreciate it. All right, so why don't we talk about recommendations? So I was a little bit torn on this one this week. I have a book that I want to recommend to you guys, but I'm going to save it for next week because I got to do something a little over a week ago now that kind of blew me away in a way that I haven't experienced in a long, long time. So I grew up playing video games. I'm 40 years old now as of, I guess, 3 weeks ago. And so I'm like the original NES generation. We grew up with the NES. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is probably my favorite game of all time. And as much as I love games, and I do love games these days, I still play a lot of games on Steam. It's rare that a game really grabs me. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's because I'm older now and I just feel differently about games. I don't know if the games are just different now, and that's what it is. It's probably a combination of a lot of things. But needless to say, being an adult with a busy schedule who works a lot, I don't have a whole lot of time to sit down and play a 100-hour RPG, you know, as much as I would absolutely love to. And that's not to say I don't buy 100-hour RPGs. God knows my Steam library is just full of them. So I say all this to tell you it's rare for me to 100% a game these days because I just don't have time to do it. The game that I am going to recommend to you, though, I 100%ed in 3 nights, which is unheard of for me, because I literally could not stop playing it. It was so funny. I could not put it down. I mean, and when I say funny, I mean, I was literally dying laughing at points because it was so freaking hilarious. So first thing I'm going to tell you is this is not a game to play around your kids. There is nothing explicitly terrible in it, but there are a lot of innuendos and some of them are extremely lowbrow. So play in front of your kids at your peril. You might have to explain things you don't want to explain until they're getting pubic hair. So just fair warning. Anyway, the game is called Thank Goodness You're Here. And it's available on Steam. I think it's also available on PlayStation 5 because I have a friend that I recommended it to, and he said that he was able to get it on PlayStation. It's basically, they describe it as a slapformer, which is like a platformer, but you walk around slapping people. So there's very few buttons. There's move around and slap, and that's pretty much all you can do. And you go from area to area, solving puzzles essentially, but I wouldn't say it's puzzles in the classic sense because you're more or less interacting with this town's people. So you go into this town as a salesman and you basically end up helping people with things that they need help with. Hence the name of the game, Thank Goodness You're Here. And it is utterly hilarious. You could probably beat the whole thing in one night if you sat down relatively early and didn't really have anything to do till midnight. In fact, that might be the way to play it because it's so freaking good that it would be incredible to digest it all in one setting. I ended up doing it over 3 nights, playing a little over an hour each night because that's usually when I have time to play a game. I usually have about an hour a night to play. So I played it nonstop for all 3 nights and I loved every minute of it. I can't wait till this studio comes out with another game because I absolutely adored Thank Goodness You're Here. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory, if you ever watched shows like Kids in the Hall with like wacky humor, or you know what, Monty Python maybe is a good example, just like generally really wacky British humor is what this game is. It's by a developer named Cole Supper, and they actually apparently have another older game that they made that's kind of similar, but looking back on it, it kind of looks like it was the beta test for Thank Goodness You're Here because it was also the slap mechanic in that game. And I may go back and play it, but there's no way it's as magical as Thank Goodness You're Here because this game is truly magical. It has an awesome cast. It is fully voice acted. I can't recommend it enough, guys. It's the best $20 you'll ever spend in your life. So don't go to the movies this weekend. Go buy Thank Goodness You're Here. And if you really, really enjoy it, let me know. Shoot me an email, ruastrocast@gmail.com. And I would genuinely like to hear if you played this game and really enjoyed it. All right. So, guys, it's been a little over an hour now, and we have officially caught up. I'm glad I was able to kind of get you up to date on what's been going on with me and my life. And we also talked some real astronomy stuff this week, which I'm very happy to be getting back to because I realize it hasn't been too deep as of late. So we kind of stepped our foot back into the proverbial waters this week. And there will, of course, be more to come next week. I also want to know if anyone's interested in hearing a part 2 of the astrophotography jargon episode, because there is certainly enough jargon left to do a part 2. So if there's any interest in that, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to produce episode 2. Otherwise, I'll probably wait until I get an itch to do it and then eventually do it at some point anyway. kind of like we always do. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. You have been listening to me, your host, Rue. This is the Astrocast. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I'm your host, Rue. We'll be back next week with another new episode. And until then, clear skies. You are listening to the Astrocast. Did you go listen to Mr. Ballin yet? Because if you haven't,